Alright, we got everything on there now. Like I said, no fan shroud for now. Everything's just kind of dry fitted on there. Everything's on pretty much hand tight, you know. Another thing while you're working with this engine, you know, make sure you cover up your exhaust port and your carb holes, and so you're not dropping, get stuff inside that cylinder. You don't want to scratch your piston up with some foreign material or anything like that. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and get this engine mounted to the base plate and get it up inside the helicopter. This is why I told you not to Loctite those bottom bolts on the frame when we were building the frame, because you're going to have to remove that bottom frame piece. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll go ahead and work on getting that frame mounted up. And okay, now the next step we're going to do is we're going to get the engine mounted onto the frame here with our dry fitted pieces. One thing I like to do is take that front mount and go ahead and screw it down. The reason I like to do that is it helps hold that front of the engine up while you're trying to get those side bolts in. Just makes it a little bit easier. I'm not going to do this all on camera here, but I'm just going to show you this. You put that little piece on there, and then it'll slide down in here, and it's easier to get the engine, hold it in place, and get those side bolts in. So let me go ahead and get those side bolts in there, and we'll get this, you know, get it ready to go, and then we'll show you about sliding it up inside the frame. Alright, now we got the engine sitting here inside that bottom frame plate. This is why I said before I like to use the landing gear as an engine stand for the most part, to just kind of help to keep things so you got someplace nice to sit everywhere and doesn't want to fall over or whatever. But you want that engine to be loose in that frame, so don't tighten down the sides and don't tighten down that front piece or anything like that. Pay attention to make sure you get those washers in between the engine and this plate here. If you don't get those in there and you go tighten it down, you're just going to put all kinds of stress on that bottom frame. You don't want to do that. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to get this into the frame to dry fit it. And this is why we did it this way, because it makes it so much easier to get this engine in and out. The other way, it's just a pain, pretty much. So, you know, with the dry fitting and then having to take back out and dial indicate everything, this is just a quick and easy way to get this engine in and out. After you do it a few times, you can probably get this engine in and out in about 10-15 minutes. So it might be a little difficult doing this while I'm, you know, on camera, but you get the idea. Basically, you just kind of rock it into place here. Make sure those frame side supports, the side frames, or those vertical supports get in where they need to be. Kind of start it onto the start shaft, get everything lined up. And boom, there it goes. It'll slide right down on there. See, so now we want to kind of get everything pressed into place, and we want to look at how the clutch is sitting on the in relation to the clutch bell here. You don't want it up inside the clutch bell. Definitely don't want that, because as the engine and everything heats up, it'll tend to expand and it'll push that clutch shoe into that top of that bell. So don't do that. You either want it to be, you know, flush or below. Usually, if you see anywhere from 1 millimeter or less of the shoe hanging down below the bell, you should be okay. It's a pretty good sized clutch, so it's going to hang on pretty good. So just looking at mine, everything looks pretty good. I'm going to probably just go ahead and go with that. And yep, yeah, I think it's lined up pretty good. So now we can, again, this is why I've built it this way. Now we can pull the engine out, and it's just a matter of pulling up and getting it out of there. You know, it's no separating the frames or anything of that nature. And the thing is, for those of you that have the Radikal 20, you can basically do this with the Radikal 20 as well. Another nice thing too is if you want to try out different pinions, or you need to change your clutch or your clutch shoe or your bell or anything like that, remove that coupling and this whole assembly will pull out without having to pull out anything else. And then you can get in there and change the pinion out and slide it back up and in. So it makes it, they didn't plan it, but it turned out to work that way, and boy, it sure made it nice getting this engine in and out and being able to work on the drivetrain. So now I'm going to go ahead and dial indicate everything, get my fan shroud on there. You got to make sure you put the fan shroud on before you tighten down the clutch. It won't slide over, the hole's not big enough. Another thing you may need to do is cut a little notch here for that front engine support. Just take a look at it. Sometimes, most of them you do. Another thing too, while you're dry fitting, you can screw it down and kind of, get everything locked in place, and take a look at, again, at the shoe, how it's riding with the clutch bell. Sometimes you may need to shim up this front bit a little bit. Again, it just depends on the engine where that front hole got placed, if it got higher or lower, whatever. So just another trick, if you got all this together and everything's still you got still a little bit of binding going on, think about putting some washers between that front mount and that bottom frame piece, and that'll help. Sometimes that gives you just that little bit that you need to get rid of that little bit of binding. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, get everything dial indicated up, get the fan shroud on there, and then we'll come back and look at the final assembly. Alright, now I've got the engine all dial indicated up. I've got it put it back into the frame here. Still got it kind of sitting loosely on the landing skids here. What you want to do when you put this back up in here, make sure you keep your engine loose still, and then you can start moving it around and getting it lined up. And what you're looking for is, first and foremost, is this start shaft should spin within the one-way bearing without any drag or any grinding or binding or anything. That's going to tell you right off if your drivetrain's lined up. If you feel any grittiness or grinding or anything in there, that's telling you that everything's kind of out of kilter, so you need to start checking your alignments. That's going to be the biggest telltale sign for you right there. A lot of times you'll find, like I mentioned before, you may have to put a couple of washers underneath this front mount to tilt the engine up a little bit. It all depends on where the hole got drilled in at the factory. Sometimes they were off just a little bit or whatever. I don't know if maybe the engine that they used when they built the, designed the frame, maybe it was off a little bit. It's hard to say. So you might want to do that. One way to check to see if you need those washers, a quick easy way to check, is to pick up one of these digital angle finders. You can get them at Harbor Freight. I think that Beast X group is selling them now too, and you can use it to check to see if the engine is sitting perpendicular with the bottom of the bottom frame. Just set the angle finder. Obviously this is all sitting on the bench, but set that on this part of the frame and you should have it out. The engine should be out of the frame like we had it sitting before, before we installed it. So put that on there, turn it on, get it zeroed up there for this angle, and then bring it up here and check it on top of the clutch, or you can check it on top of the fan hub, anything like that. And if it's out just a little bit, then see which way it's out, and if you can take and put some shims under there and maybe that'll get it up and get it level. So that's one way you can check too. I probably should have mentioned that a little sooner. Using this digital angle finder, I wouldn't use a bubble level. Bubble levels aren't very accurate. I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well go by eye, or feeling the grittiness here. But I would definitely recommend doing it with this if you're going to checking the level. So after that, like I said, just make sure this is spinning nice and free, and make sure this whole assembly is spinning nice and free too. And that's pretty much it. Now you can go back through and finish Loctiting the bottom frame screws, get that all done. You can pull one screw out at a time on your engine mounting and go ahead and get it Loctited in place. I'd use just a little bit of red Loctite on the ones that go into the engine. Don't put a lot in there because you want to be able to get it off later. And make sure you blue Loctite the ones here on the back frame section. So that's pretty much it for getting the engine installed. Like I said, it was a little deviation from the manual, but I think in the end this is a lot easier because you can get this engine in and out, and you almost have to take it in and out a couple of times just to make sure you got everything right. So you don't have to worry about pulling all this other stuff out. And that way, once you get this initial mesh set up here at the top, you don't have to mess with this anymore. It's just bringing the engine up and getting it lined up with that. So I definitely think this is an easier way to deal with getting this engine in and out and getting it all lined up and indicated. So I guess the next thing we're going to move on to, we'll go ahead and build the tail section, and we'll get that put on there. And we've already built the head, so we can get the head on there, and after we get those two sections put together, we can kind of get everything go over everything, make sure we got everything in the right places, and then start looking at putting electronics in there.